I think at some level, when you start, if you're not putting in 120 hours a week, you're not going to get escape velocity.
All right. Hey, you all, thanks for tuning in today. I'm starting to do more formal introductions because the level of people continue to scale up. So I'm personally excited. I hope it's as beneficial for you listening today as it is for me on what I'm going to learn and grow from. But our guest today is someone who's had a major impact on how businesses grow and scale. Verne Harnish is the founder of Entrepreneurs Organization EO. We just had some good offline conversation about that. It supports over 18,000 entrepreneurs around the world. It totally is in line with our podcast and what we do here. He's the author of Scaling Up, one of the most practical business books out there for growth-minded leaders. Verne spent decades helping companies get clear on strategy, people, execution, and cash, and 4 things that make or break a growing business. Today, we're going to dig into what it really takes to scale with purpose, which I'm pumped about, stay focused, and build something that lasts. Verne, welcome to the Necessary Entrepreneur directly from Barcelona, huh?
You bet. Mark, it's good to be on with you. And so much fun chatting with you before.
We'll see. We'll see how much he appreciates it with the old anarchist here. There's so many things here, but I want to jump right in. You have such a breadth of, and the reason why I'm doing introductions now is to give the audience a perspective on who's sharing the information that you've garnered and what we're going to learn from you today. Because it's always important to know, if people say Elon, we know that's the guy that shoots off rockets and he's built these car companies that nobody said he could build. We have context. So it's important to have this context. So I don't normally jump in on questions, but I have a big one. I hope it's a big one, and you're ready to hit this one out of the park.
All right.
Is the key to success, because we're going to get into all the things you've learned and you know over the years from being around so many elite people, is the key to success a few non-negotiable attributes and skills that we need, or is it more attitude and mindset?
Mark, this is the genius of the and, as Jim Collins would say. So you've got to absolutely have both. There's a lot of folks that, hey, they want to knock it out of the park, but as Warren Buffett said, it's what we don't know that we don't know is what ends up getting us in trouble. And this is why, he reads 500 pages every morning. Mark Cuban, who was involved early on when I launched YEO, I didn't know, Mark, until I read his book decades later, that he commits to reading 3 hours every day. I mean, we just think he's this amazing entrepreneur that's done 150 different companies and all of that. And when I was talking to Mark about it, he's like, hey, I'm just looking for one idea out of that 3 hours that's going to help one of those 150 companies. And so we know that leaders are readers, leaders are learners. But it's helpful if you're playing to win versus playing not to lose, which is one of the reasons why I was just with a bunch of YPOers. And that's a combination of entrepreneurs and, what we call, the second, third generation leaders and hired guns. And, what entrepreneurs don't appreciate is those folks that have to take over a family business, they're not starting at zero like us. So if we lose it all, hey, we're just back to what we already know. But they have the family jewels that they are responsible for. And the pressure of that is unimaginable to an entrepreneur. We think they were just handed this gift, like Ted Turner was with his dad's business, or even Trump with his. The pressure is infinite. So, because you start playing not to lose instead of playing to win.
What do you think that looks like? Playing not to lose versus playing to win? Is there practical things that we can, because there's a bunch of stuff that goes through my mind over my 20-year journey, right? What's that look like practically?
Well, our view is the biggest constraint. Look, you're always looking for the constraint. That's the goal of an entrepreneur, is to go find the constraint and fix it. That's what Elon does every week in each of his 6 companies. And one of the most significant constraints to success is success. You've achieved it, and now you get incremental in your thinking. You lose that ambition to go do something big. And you've got enough to protect that you quit playing to win. And so what that looks like is you're playing defense. Have you ever watched your favorite sports team and they're in this like big league lead and then they start playing prevent D? I mean, Tom Brady counted on this, right? And then all he'd do is just pick you off 10 yards at a time down the sideline. And all of a sudden, they actually did the research in the World Cup. And 86% of the time, a team had a lead and started them playing prevent D. 86% of the time, they lost that match. So you got to keep the pedal to the metal.
So you're making an argument that a hockey team should pull the goalie all the time.
Isn't that interesting? And that's a, you know what, that would be one of, that's like today in NFL, you should go for the fourth down, right? The stats support that.
Yeah.
And
where do you think new thinking comes from? When these things, it's been done a certain way, not just by one organization, but in an industry, it's been done for so long. Is it just one individual that thinks different, or does something happen in society? How do you think that change happens? When they started going for it on fourth down, then people start talking about the analytics behind it. Back in the day, Billy Bean, I think, with the Oakland A's,
that's right.
Stats and analytics. Where does that thinking come from? Is it an individual? Is there something happens in society?
Well, I don't know if you've done a psilocybin journey.
I haven't, but I've heard them all. Just listen to Rogan's podcast. You can hear him talk about it every other one.
You know, I've never done drugs, but I finally, legally did a psilocybin journey down in Jamaica with Beckley Institute. And you really do connect to what they call the grid. And you realize that, Edison didn't invent the light bulb. He read about it. He just made it better. So I think there's a collective intelligence that a kind of a group comes to the same point on, but there ends up being somebody who kind of releases it first and makes it popular. So look, that's too deep of a question for most entrepreneurs. We just want to get on with, solving some big problem in the world.
But we talk about these high-flying billionaires and we always invoke them. That's what's so fascinating, though. Right? You have a Jeff Bezos. Is it one day or is it day one? And there's something about these high flyers that they integrate one idea. So you start in the beginning, you just have to do one thing or have one big idea. I drive by here. I'm in the Midwest and in Cincinnati, and they have the hub of Prime Air here at the international airport here. And you drive by and they acquired hundreds of acres and built the Prime Hub. And it's actually their main entrance is Day One Boulevard.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah. So it's ingrained. There's one idea ingrained in these companies.
Well, that's the subject of the new book I'm writing. And if you look at logos, pathos, ethos, head, heart, and soul, the question I've been asking entrepreneurs, and they don't know the answer to until we take them through a process, what is the soul of the business? And what I'm discovering, it's deeper than the purpose. The purpose ends up being hollow if you don't bring soul to it. You don't bring this ethos, this character, this authenticity. And I'm discovering that the source of that ethos, the source of that soul, is something that happened to you in childhood. And whereas right now we're all talking about we have to somehow or another overcome the traumas of our childhood, I think this is going to be the one thing that we can celebrate in our childhood. And so, a simple example is really the ethos, that the soul of Apple, in a word, was always design. And that came from the famous painting the fence story, where he's painting the fence for his dad and he doesn't paint the inside. His dad's like, why didn't you paint the inside? Well, nobody can see it. He says, but you'll know. And later, Steve obsesses about making sure that the screw heads are lined up inside the devices where nobody can see. And that maniacal focus around this one aspect of your ability to deliver on your products, your services, and your purpose. And so it's been fun. Amy's Ice Cream was the latest one. I met Amy, who founded Amy's Ice Cream in Austin. And we figured out the soul. We named it. And the minute she did, she knew who could maybe take over her company for her and not destroy it.
What
So
was
that's
what was what was her soul? Was that private? Is that secret?
no, 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 no. If anyone's been to Austin, you got to go to Amy's Ice Cream. This is an institution down there. She in her 20s, Mark, you maybe know the story. She's going to go to med school, and she ends up working at this ice cream store, and so she puts med school on hold. Now let's speed forward 4 decades later. This institution, and she's lamenting. I'm having lunch with her, lamenting that she didn't have any family members to take it over, but she knows, as most entrepreneurs do, you sell your company to a private equity firm or whatever, it's over. And by the way, the new CEO, Howard Schultz's fifth at Starbucks, Brian Nickel, I thought said something interesting a few weeks ago. He says, I think I know what happened. Starbucks lost its soul. He's really the first leader I've heard use that word this year. And so anyway, Amy's like lamenting, and I hear her speak. She does a talk for this group called Gathering of Titans. And so I sit down with her. I said, first of all, what's your soul? What's the soul of Amy? She goes, I don't know. No one's ever asked me that question. I said, well, I think I know what it is. She goes, you got to be kidding. And to give you a little context, she said, I don't have any big purpose. All we want to change the world. I just want to have a wonderful moment. First of all, moment is one of the key words. I want every customer to, when you experience ice cream, it is a great moment. Not life-changing, but it's a moment. She said, number two, though, I want not just the ice cream to be that moment. I want everything else that we do in the store to be a part of that moment. She used the term other moment. And she said, I want that other moment to be irreverent. So literally her employees bust on customers. They will have ice cream fights in the store in front of the customers. There'll be ice cream dripping from the ceiling. And I said, Amy, the soul of your business is irreverent other moments. And I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it right now. Again, that moment when the light went on. And then I said, and I'm equating the soul, Mark, to the Olympic torch. You know, when I did an AI to say, hey, design what would be the cover of my book around soul, it gave me a flame. And what's cool about the Olympics is the Olympic flame never goes out. It stays lit during and between the Olympics. And this is the flame that the entrepreneur, the founder mode, has to tend to. Soul is like soil. We've got to tend to it, or our baby, no matter what it gets, will die. And so I said, who, Amy, could carry this torch? And that's literally the image I'm using. Who could carry this torch forward for you? It's not going to be a PE firm. And at that moment, she goes, my niece. I go, tell me more about her. She's like 20. She's been begging to work for the company. She's as irreverent as you get. It's why I love her, and she's like my sister, her mom. And I said, so? She said, well, I'm telling her to go to college. I said, Amy, you chose not to go to medical school to run this ice cream shop. You need to go back and talk to your niece. Now, I haven't closed the loop to see what's going on, but that's how specific it is. And just to finish it out, I think you're probably maybe like me. I bet against Apple when Steve Jobs died. Everybody said it was a genius with 1,000 helpers. But who carried the torch for Steve after he died? Johnny Ive.
Oh, well, from the design perspective. Oh, we could talk about focus. Have you heard that conversation? So did he carry the torch from him to Tim Cook? Was he?
No, Tim, my view is you can outsource, you can delegate everything but the soul. And so he did that with Tim Cook. Tim Cook ran everything else, but Steve had lunch every day with Johnny Ive.
Yeah.
Steve stayed maniacally focused and
on the design, right? On the appearance, on the look.
No, even every word and every ad. It was he who designed the Apple Store, and cared about every thing that was in
Have,
that store. And
have you heard Johnny?
so when
Have you heard Johnny Ive? I think he was recently. He was in England. I don't know which one of the elite universities, but maybe it was years ago. But it's on YouTube.
yeah,
He talks about Steve, what he taught him about focus. Have you seen that?
yeah, it's spectacular. And so anyway, Johnny was at Apple the next 10 years when its market cap went from 300 billion to 3 trillion. And then he left in 2021. And like, I don't know, but usually it's about a 36-month from idea to market. Apple sure hasn't kind of released anything that interesting recently. And you saw the announcement last week about Johnny Ive.
Yep. Yep. So
Just got,
why haven't we written the book about him? Why hasn't Walter Isaacson written that one?
you know what? He probably is in the middle of doing that. But now that this $6.5 billion purchase for 55 employees, it's insane right now.
Yeah, there's something happening.
But back to the thing. I think what I've discovered is what founder mode means that Brian Chesky brought to the world last year and Paul Graham is that there's this soul that it's the fire that burns within a venture, and you've got to tend to it and understand it. And we have to quit beating founders up for their maniacal micromanaging ways around this one area. Instead of telling them they got to let go of everything.
So what does your brain do in this new world with the conversation around formal education? You know, you spoke to Amy, didn't go to med school. She talked to her niece and said, hey, do you really need to go to college? You spent a lot of time around these big organizations of Harvard, of MIT, and these premier development programs, and, you know, about the next giants and who's going to lead the country. What does your brain tell you now about the moment that we're in with formal education and higher education?
Yeah. Well, you're asking me that right at a moment where my youngest 17 has flunked out spectacularly all his classes at his boarding school, having been sort of kicked out of his previous boarding school. And I'm having a conversation with his mother yesterday, and it's like, you know what? It's time maybe school's not for him. Get him out in the world, do his gap year now. So I'm actually looking at it, pulling him out and say, son, you're going on the road with me for the next year. And we're going to, like we did that trip around the world for his older siblings. We used K-12 and they did 2 years of school in like 2 hours a day. You know, it shows you just kind of what a waste a lot of it is. And you've seen the moves, what IBM's done with P-Tech, hiring kids at 18, the Peter Thiel scholars. And who was the latest one that just announced? Who is it? The $5,400 a month internships.
Yeah, I forget. I heard somebody talking about it last week, but this might be in line also with, you know, University of Austin, what they're doing down there. That's a whole unique conversation.
No, tell me what's going on there.
Well, you know, previous to a lot of organizations getting a big shakeup, it happens around political cycles. But you know, what was happening for a long time, you would get these entrepreneurs that were elite and high flying that just didn't look at the educational system as something they wanted to turn their kids over to.
Yeah.
Right. I'm paraphrasing it, but that's what I inferred from listening to them. And so they kept looking for these Montessorial sort of environments to put them in, to learn a different way. And a few of these entrepreneurs got together and they started a university. It's the University of Austin. And it is a different way to teach school and college. You should look at it. I haven't been down there to see it in person, but when you hear them speak to it about what they're doing, they're challenging the way that they would challenge an old way to do business.
Yeah.
And so it's not around these extended 4-year degrees and 5 and 6 year degrees. It's a new way to learn. So it's interesting to see what happens in those moments. But I think about your son.
Point, I had drinks with him last night. And I'm an investor in entrepreneur Christopher Pomeranning's venture here in Barcelona called Learn Life. And after he was a venture capitalist, did some of the biggest deals in Spain, he and his wife had 3 children. And he's like, I am not going to send them to the traditional school approach. And so we pulled together literally a brain trust of the top 100 thought leaders around this space. And he's launched this Now he's got 3 campuses called Learn Life, and he's building out 10 more. It Everyone who comes to visit Mark, you're blown away that he is doing this radically different, and it's
What do you think
working.
special's about it? You just came off the dinner with him. What really hits with you that, wow, that is really different? Not just different. I have this idea that I only
Yeah.
think different is good if it really makes change or moves something forward and does something better. That's the only time different's good to me.
Yeah. You know, what it reminds me of is finally some of the best parenting advice I'd ever gotten. And that is, you've got to play the way your child wants to play. And I'll just tell a quick story. So my oldest at the time was 3, and he was a handful. And I knew it because I wasn't really being the father. And part of it came down to is he'd want to play Thomas the Train. And I'm a mechanical engineer, Mark, so I know how train tracks are supposed to be put together, right? So I'm like taking control. I'm like, no, son, that's not how let's hook this. And so then I go to this YPO event and I hear this, you got to play the way your child wants to play. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I go home. I'm like, hey, let's play Tom. You want to play Thomas the Train? Yeah, Dad. All right, go. And I let him put the track together the way he wanted to. Which train would you want me to be? He always wanted me to be Percy. That was transformational. And I do these crazy dumb dad musings to my kids every Sunday. I literally wrote about this on Sunday to them now that it's, 25 years later, and he's getting ready to get married next weekend. So what Learn Life, I think, really ultimately is let the child learn the way and learn what they want to learn when they want to learn it. Nobody had, as Christopher said last night, nobody had to teach a child how to speak. Nobody really had to teach a child how to walk. They figure it out if you will just give them a supportive environment in order to do it. So that's the essence of it.
Yeah, it sounds like you just have to be there to make them believe and tell them they can.
Yeah. So we helped open up the other crazy school is called Sudbury. It's out of Massachusetts. And literally they have a story where they had a kid who just fished for 15 years. But everything he needed to learn, the math around that, the language around that, the stories, all came from him just fishing for 15 years. I know it sounds anarchist, but
do you think that's an approach that we should take more, just to really go all in and go deep and be singularly focused on, seems boring, but one thing?
well, let's bring it back to entrepreneurs. So he just re-released his book, Pete Martin. Have you had a chance to have Pete
No.
on there?
Nope.
So Pete's out of Cleveland. He
Okay.
has a book called Scale Up Faster.
Yep.
And what he did, he really did a Jim Collins-like piece of research with the Inc. 5000 database. And he wanted to look at what did the companies do that were not venture backed, that were able to get to 100 million in valuation the quickest. So that was the question. And one of the findings that really struck me, Mark, is that those are the companies that got to 100 million valuation quickest sold only one thing, and they sold it only one way. That was it. And I think about it, I was lucky. I think I'm still on the masthead as the venture columnist for Fortune magazine. But anyway, decades ago, I happened to be at the Fortune offices when the Google boys showed up. And folks don't remember, but the original name was Back Rub. I rub your back, you rub my back. We're going to use that kind of. And they're like, we want to show you our new thing. And so we're like, pull up the website, right? That was the cool thing right there. It was doing websites. They pull up the website and all that was there was the box. Didn't even say Google above it. It was just a box and a white screen. And it blew us away. And think about it. One box
How simple
has
that is.
created a company that's $2 trillion in valuation.
but it was everything that was behind the box, right?
Yeah, but it did just one thing,
Yeah.
and they really marketed it one way. So that's something I've been trying to absorb myself more.
So we touched on doing things one way, but then he also went into, you spoke about, he went in and looked at the Inc. 5000 and
Yeah.
what the ones that made 100 million or more had in common. That
Well,
goes back to
valuation scaled to 100
evaluation.
million. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that goes back to, the idea of one of the books that you wrote years ago, right? About only a few companies succeeding and the rest don't.
Yeah.
There's the
Yeah.
paraphrase of the topic, but I just broke it down to the average simple-minded people like me, right? Um, what how do a few make it and the rest don't? Because that's what we're talking about here, about the valuations of 100 million too.
Yeah. Well, so our work, by the way, in our framework, people, strategy, execution, cash that you shared, isn't something that I made up. It's something that Michael Porter, Hubert Joly, who turned around Best Buy, and even IDEO, who's launched 100 companies and supporting another 100, found that, look, there are 4 decisions you got to get right. There are 4 jobs of a CEO. The job of the owner is to drive valuation and then choose who's going to be the CEO. And by the way, a lot of business owners out there need to fire one of those people, by the way. And you've got to get what IDEO found is when they asked the question, which one of those 4 mattered the most, when they had analyzed what deals succeeded and what deals failed. And they found 2 interesting things. First, all 4 mattered equally. Man, you're missing one of those, and it's like a 4-legged table. That thing falls over. And what happens is a lot of entrepreneurs are really good at like one of those areas, and they don't backfill. Like their ability to really understand how to utilize capital, which is the kind of the cash area, is probably one of the biggest weaknesses of entrepreneurs and why we get our heads handed to us by private equity firms and others. But then IDEO found one other, Mark, and I had to go back and edit my books as a result. They said, but they found one that trumped the other 4. And I'm like, all right, what is it? Market timing. The market makes you look smart or the market makes you look dumb. They said they had launched a company that should have been YouTube, but it was too early. We didn't have the devices that made it easy to record. We didn't have the bandwidths. There's a timing, like a wave, you've got to catch. And so part of it is luck. And that's why Jim Collins studied the role of luck.
So can we, as entrepreneurs, can we evaluate this timing, or it's just going to be the roll of the dice, even if it's a great idea?
No, you know what? So my mentor, I won't call it, Joe Mancuso, decades ago, he said, all you had to do was analyze the trend of newsletters. If you want to predict what industry is going to be hot next, look at a trend of what newsletters pop up first. First newsletters, then those newsletters would turn into a magazine, a publication. And then those publications would turn into industries.
So how do we frame that now? What's that look like now with the new age of tech? What is the new newsletter and then the new publication?
I think podcasts,
yeah,
and other media like that. And I think if you would take AI and ask AI what's going to be, well, by the way, let me get right to that point. So what's the largest movie studio in the world now? Netflix, 20 billion a year. Why? Not the standard guys, because they've got the data. They know what we're watching, when we're watching it, who we're watching, how far we watched in, da, 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 da. So we have a client. Let's bring it down to mere mortal status. We have a client, COE Distributing, out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They distribute office furniture. They're now one of the largest in the United States. And one of the things that J.D. Ewing had the University of Pittsburgh data analytics group of students create for him 4 years ago. And by the way, if you looked at AI years, that would be like 28 years, dog years
Or
ago.
200, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, hey, if Netflix can predict what movie's going to be hot, he said the biggest thing our challenge is predicting what's going to be the hot furniture color, what's going to be the right fabric color, what's going to be the right design for 2025. And by the way, you can go to his site, co-distributing, coedistributing.com, and look at what's new for 2025. That is AI that is now driving those decisions and is even then creating the images. He used to have to mock up the furniture and do photo shoots. It's creating the videos, it's creating the script. And he's a mere mortal like us, not, a Meta or any of those companies. And so it's that ability to predict is what Dr. Deming said was the number one job of a leader. And you don't have to be months ahead, you just have to be minutes ahead. And so that's where I think we come back to you got to see the wave and catch it.
Why is it just one step ahead? Why is the job of a leader to be a highly predictive and capable person? Why is that the thing?
Well, no one's ever asked me that question. I thought the answer was obvious, Mark.
I don't think it is, because you're talking to a mere mortal here.
Yeah. So, you just, man, if you could have guessed that bell bottoms were going to be hot and we're first in the market with bell bottoms, and then all you want to do is wait for bell bottoms to come back in fashion. I think it's that's the same.
You're
Now,
just ahead of the game, right? That's it. You're just ahead of the game.
you're just ahead of the game, or you created the game that you can be the head of, which was, the magic of the Steve Jobs of the world. We didn't know we needed an iPad, but iPod, but everyone says that. But what he was brilliant at, and this is what we teach entrepreneurs, is the single most important strategy question. And I think it's all about getting the right question. It starts with strategy. That's your number one job, entrepreneur, is you set strategy. And what is strategy? It's answering one question. What is the job to be done by your product or service by the customer? So if Steve Jobs had just shown us this iPod, we're like, why do I need that? But what was the job to be done? 1,000 songs in your pocket. Now I knew why I had to have it. My Walkman is on my pocket, not in it. It's holding an album. I want 1,000 songs in my pocket. Boom. And entrepreneurs, the ones who are able to articulate that and deliver on that clearly stated job to be done, like ours. We finally got clear after 25 years, Mark. Our job is to help 10x the valuation of the business. Yeah, revenue, profit, make it easier, get rid of drama, blah, 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 blah. But no, we have one job, and that is to help you 10x the valuation of the business. And we do it every day.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you like these types of conversations, be sure to follow The Necessary Entrepreneur on your favorite platform so you never miss out on future content.
Through what entity is that for these clients that you have?
They're scaling up. That's our global coaching organization, 300 partners, 6 continents, kind of stuff.
Those events looked awesome. I tell you what, whether we call it COVID, whether we call it pandemic, you had them really rolling through 2019.
We did, and having to go online like everybody else did, we were there to support.
I go back to, you had a conversation, and you can go out on YouTube and find it. You had a conversation with the founder, if not the founder, the CEO of the container store.
Yeah.
You had a conversation with him. I believe it was 2019. I believe it might have been before. You probably know in your head.
Yeah.
And he talked about the value of people.
Yeah.
And how to identify talent, and that he could do what most of us would consider overpaying them, but the return, he talked about the pay should just be tracked based upon just a percentage of revenue or percentage of sales. And then you asked him a question, he spoke, he said, hey, look at what Costco does. They pay their people 50% more than their competitors, and look at the performance in sales.
Yeah.
So he has the idea. It's similar to what Richard Branson is. Take care of your people. They'll take care of the customers. I try to poke holes in that all day long. I try to, but is this still just about the people? All these ideas, it seems like we make it so complex when we should be making it simple. Is it just about people and these human connections and what we're doing together? And is it about the people?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. First, Rested Soul, you saw a few weeks ago, Container Store just declared bankruptcy.
It's wild.
You want to talk about whoever bought them from Kip and Garrett, the co-founders, probably stripped this very soul out of the business, and the rest is history. And remember, their fundamental idea is that one great person can replace three good. And by the way, that's the same with CEOs of companies. Fortune found that with the Fortune 500 last year. There's a group of companies that outperformed the rest by a factor of 3. You got to credit or not the CEO. And you're right. We're all in the same business, which is how do we organize people to serve other people? Now, Fortune added to it last week. We got to now figure out how we organize people plus AI agents. It's AI plus a player is one of my latest columns in Chief Executive Magazine. But let me provide a little bit of clarity. So August 19th, 2019, the Business Roundtable met, the top 200 kind of CEOs, and said, maybe for the first time in 22 years, we should update the job of a company. And up to that point, it was to serve the shareholders exclusively. There was no mention of customers. There was no mention of employees. There was no mention of community. So they said, we're going to change that. Now it's customers, employees, shareholders, community, the stakeholder model. At that moment, I emailed John Cotter at Harvard. I go, John, you got to either be laughing or crying. And here's why. 40 years ago, he did the piece of research. It was a 4-year study over 11 years, looked at over 200 companies to answer one question. Was it the companies who put the employees first? Did they outperform the companies who put the customer first? Or did they outperform the companies who put the shareholder first? And right now, lately, I've been having my audience raise their hands. Nobody, by the way, says shareholder anymore. That would not be politically correct. I'll get about a third of the audience that says customer. And that would be kind of a Fred Reichheld net promoter score fact that companies that have the highest net promoter score in their industry outperform the competition by a factor of 5.5 in terms of growth evaluation. So that's significant. And then 2/3 of the audience says it's employees. They've kind of come around. And then I ask, but how many of you think it's a trick question? And it is. What John Cotter's research found is there was a handful of companies that treated all three equally. So yes, it comes down to the people, but it's everybody employed. Back to the suppliers. The reason Dell did what it did, Michael Dell was able to do what it did, taught by Tom Meredith, was because they focused on taking care of their suppliers in a way that nobody else in the industry did, as well as their employees and their customers and their shareholders. So here's the sad news, entrepreneurs. You have to keep everybody happy.
So why would we do this? What is wrong with us?
Yeah. And by the way, entrepreneurs generally don't like people. I mean, our view is we would love our business if we didn't have employees or customers interrupting our grand visions for what it is that we want to accomplish. The reality is we need to do it through and with people and AI moving forward. Why do we do it? Because there's a problem we see. There's a opportunity to grab. We're unemployable. And so let's go fix it. We make the change that's necessary in the world.
Why do you
Not
think we're
government,
unemployable? Yeah, I'm not.
not NGOs, none of that.
Yeah, no, I'm not. Everybody else keeps the systems together.
Yeah.
It's like the engines are fired and the flame is carried by these entrepreneurs. To your point,
That's right. That is the soul. They something happened in childhood. I just had I was with an Indian entrepreneur founder. We identified the moment in her life that ignited this flame. And the company has 1,700 employees, going to 30,000 now in India. But yes, we ignite a flame.
All right. So another question.
Yeah.
Are there a few questions that every CEO, we talked about the 4 categories that it's important to answer the question, but are there a few questions that every CEO, founder, entrepreneur, even though we put them together in the beginning, they're the same person?
Yeah.
Are there a few questions that person with all those roles needs to ask themselves that are essential? Or is it more important for them to tell themselves a few things?
Well, that is the idea of the lean startup. Eric Ries got that right, which he really got from, blank. I forgot just his first name. I just went blank on Blake's first name.
We back doing comedy. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah. Well, yeah, some bad comedy for sure. But that's what Brad Feld discovered when he co-founded Techstars, that Silicon Valley, and he was a student of mine back at that MIT program I launched for EO or YEO back in 91, 92, is that Silicon Valley was taking 2 years and wasting $2 million to create something that nobody wanted. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs that do that, and that's why they end up like not making it. And that's when he said, look, I think you can get it done in 2 months and 20,000 instead of 2 years and 2 million. And that's why he launched Techstars, co-founded it. And that was that idea that you've got to be in rapid dialogue with the customer of whatever it is that you're creating. And ultimately we think, and that's a measure of intelligence, is we have the answers. It's the question we do not know. And you've got to get the questions right. So our work is really about just what you said. And there are 4 key questions you got to get right around people, strategy, execution, strategy question being, what is the job to be done? And that was Clay Christensen at Harvard. Let me give him a nod. He's the one that popularized that question. But until you understand the real answer to that, you don't know what to do next. You don't know where to innovate. You don't know where to move forward. So you got to get that question right first.
So when I consistently listen to, Mark Andreessen and all these people from, VC, this world, a guy listening to him, I don't know if I share any of these things that we try to have as identifiable. Do we agree with him? That guy is just brilliant.
Oh, he is.
He's just next level brilliant. But I think, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but him and a few others, they don't necessarily fund the idea in the company. They fund the individual. The person. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so Brad Feld, and again, he's not the one who created this, but he's the one that said, it's got to pass the 3 ass test. You've got to be going after a big ass problem. And so, yeah, I'm going to fund the person, but the person's bringing something big. There's no way I could have gotten the Reagan administration and President Reagan himself on board with the Association of Collegiate Entrepreneurs I launched in 82 if I said, I'm launching a student group at Wichita State University, but I'm going to build the world's largest entrepreneur organization. Then I got Reagan and Steve Jobs and Michael Dell and Inc. Magazine and Venture to all sign on to a student at Wichita State University. So I think first you got to go after something big. Number 2, he said, you got to have a kick-ass solution. So yeah, I've got to see that person has got a different angle on solving that big ass problem. And then you've got to have, the term is smart ass team. And it's generally not just the person. What movie were we on? Like Ocean's 28,000 or something like that. But,
Ocean's 13, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. But it's this idea that you just got to get the old gang back together and figure out which bank you're going to rob next. And so
that's talking about talent. I mean, that's what that is.
Well, it's usually the person is bringing with them their team.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just them. And so those are the three that I think they really look at. Of course, it's easy to say we invest in the person, but I think all three of those have to be there.
Yeah, because Steve, if you read the book, since you knew him so well, or you got to know him through Wichita State, and I think there's so much information now. I think there's so much out there about the gurus now. It's as if you know them, if you study them the right way. And so he hated professional leadership because what happened when they convinced him to step aside, and they brought in the professional CEO from Pepsi, and so. This is a big question about talent. Does the talent in the previous experience apply to this thing as well?
That's what I'm looking into. And what I'm concluding is, if the venture you're going into next can benefit from that same soul that you put in the previous venture. So who I learned this from was Wayne Huizenga. Wayne, prior to Elon,
Miami Dolphins, the whole thing, right?
Well, he's the only guy till Elon that built 3 multi-billion-dollar plus public companies in 3 different industries.
What were they?
Waste management, hauling waste, renting videos, Blockbuster, and selling cars, AutoNation.
Yep.
And my second article I ever did for Fortune was called Grow Where You're Planted, because Frank Carney, co-founder of Pizza Hut, sells to Pepsi. He then tries fast casual Chinese. That loses half his wealth. He then tries fast casual Mexican. That lost the other half of his wealth. And here's a guy that co-founded Pizza Hut who's now broke. And I'm like, how does that happen, that somebody that talented blows it? And by the way, that's more the track record.
Yeah.
By the way, he then got it back by becoming the second largest franchisee of Papa John's Pizza. So his core competency was around pizza. That was it. Neil Balter sold California Closets at age 29, and then lost 20% of his wealth doing a flexible dog leash infomercial. Now, that's a popular product today, but that was not his thing.
Maybe the timing as well, right? So not to interrupt here, but I think this is important. So Wayne Huizenga, the funny thing about him and Take Elon, do you think you'll find out from all of your research that they were so brilliant that they found the 3 different categories of businesses that were ready for their thing in the timing? Because there's no way that one individual, the 3 businesses that they come up with, the timing's just right for Blockbuster, for Waste Management. There's no way. So were they smart enough? You're not going to hit the lottery 3 times.
So that's why I went to go see Wayne. I said, Wayne, you're blowing my theory here.
Yeah.
He said, you got to explain to me how you did this. And he had these piercing blue eyes. And by the way, it's a stare I've only seen a handful of times. Michael Dell has it.
Sam Zell had it, didn't he?
Maybe it's just because of his advanced age. They weren't as bright. All right. But man, there's, when Jesse whatever his name, who played Mark Zuckerberg in the movie, Jesse said the toughest thing he had to master was to stare. There's a handful of these. So I saw it with Wayne Huizenga. His blue eyes light up and he goes, look, Verne, I have more failures than I have successes. And what I learned is I have 4 rules. And if I go into a venture that can't benefit from those 4, I get my head handed to me. But if I choose a venture that can benefit from those 4 and I can make it happen, it goes to the moon. And so he learned this the hard way. What was his filter? And he chose the next 2 ventures that fit his filter. Now, AutoNation almost broke his back, Mark. It took him 7 years to figure out what I would call the X factor, how to switch the power from the incumbents to him. But he finally did in Denver, Colorado, and that went to 10 billion then overnight, that business.
Was there one thing, was it specific to that business, or was there something that he stacked and compounded on top of all of his learning that he learned that he could use in everything else then? Was it one thing, or was that unique to the car business that he had to learn over those 7 years?
It's what I ended up calling in my book the X factor. Where is the underlying 10x or more hidden advantage over the competition. By the way, Elon's got it because the Raptor engine was 2 million. Raptor 2 is 1 million. Raptor 3 is purportedly something around 200,000. The fact that your workhorse of your industry is 1/10 the cost of what up to this point competitors were having to pay is the advantage. So Wayne with Blockbuster, Mark, was able to get videos for $6 instead of everyone else having to pay $65. So that allowed him to have 10 times the inventory, which meant what was the job to be done by Blockbuster? Always the hits. The thing that frustrated us all is they never had the hit movie in stock. I remember he said, I only figured out one other thing in Blockbuster. He had his hand like this. He said, if you only have a mom and pop small store, all your videos are displayed like this. Now that I've got a big store, I can display the hits like this on the walls. He said, that's it. AutoNation, he knew he had to fix the repeat business, repeat customer ratio. Every car dealer only has 20% repeat business. They have to go out and sell their sold to get traffic for the other 80%. He said, what if I could flip that ratio? It took him 7 years, and he finally flipped it in Denver, Colorado. And then AutoNation took off. So we always knew that there was a key constraint holding back the entire industry. And if he could solve it, he would own the industry. And he did.
Through this process, jumping back a little bit, what's your soul?
Yeah. So it's always hard to, we have a core value, practice what we preach. It's super hard for people who coach and teach this
for
stuff.
humans. It's hard for humans
to actually do this stuff. Ours has to do with the authenticity of what we teach. You know what drives me nuts? And that's how you know your soul is what drives you maniacally nuts, is when my competitors make shit up. They want to come up with some 6-box model or whatever that has no root in anything but what the hell they're making up. You can see it's lighting me up right now. It's why I reference 40 other books in my book. It's why I make sure that the question, job to be done, I reference Clay Christensen and don't claim it's mine. And this drives me nuts. So sorry. But people then can count on that what we teach is, there's a new competitor out who's got a book called The Science of, it's got no science behind it. He's making shit up.
What is science in 2025? What is it? Even using that word, I'm like, what is going on here?
Yeah. So, but our stuff is based on reality and real people and smart folks who smarter than me that we pulled together.
Is it our job, and I say anyone who's in a leadership position, and trying to influence and help people change their lives, is it our job to make the complex simple, or are we trying to just explain the complex?
Look, as you scale, it gets more complex. That's the ultimate constraint. It's why a good sized team is, when Steve Jobs came back to save Apple, it wasn't a team of 500 or 50. It was a team of 5. And that's what I share with folks. You don't need 50 or 500 to change an industry. He put 5, he chose, Johnny Ive and 4 others, and he locked them in his conference room, and they met every day for 2 years until they got out the one computer. Remember, he came back and he said, I finally learned how to scale a business from Pixar. Well, the fact that Pixar only had one thing to do, Toy Story, and they only had to do one thing to do every 2 years, and Catmull had 20 of 21 straight #1 hits. So he said, I'm going to do that at Apple. And he got them out of handhelds and scanners and printers and everything, and said, it's back to Pete Martin's research. The companies who have just one thing to sell and one way to sell it books for Amazon. We're only going to sell books, and we're going to sell them online. You can't go into a store. That's how you do it.
So you see why so many companies a decade or two later go out of business, right? Because something evolved and changed and they didn't. It's a perfect example of Amazon. They started with books, but look at them now.
Yeah.
But then a Blockbuster didn't evolve. A Kmart didn't evolve when a Walmart shows up, right? There's something that changes, and the old way that made you dominate an industry is not the new way. So that's tough for a big established business to understand, because we're sitting here telling them just do one thing and do it great and do it really well. Until when?
Well, that, by the way, that's the opportunity for entrepreneurs. That's why we get to pick off these Fortune 500 on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But let's come back to Google. There's the conundrum. Google did one thing, search.
Yep.
And then they decided to go into all kinds of other things where they had to create a new brand called Alphabet. And finally, about a year ago, they said, you know what? 2 trillion of our 2 trillion net worth comes from search. We think the next trillion is going to come from search. And they took their eye off the ball. And that's why the Google boys are back. Sergey's back in, I understand, programming to see if they can get caught back up to what happened with OpenAI. And now look at Apple having lost Johnny Ive, and supposedly they're getting ready to release a device that will trump the iPhone.
Yeah, the new way to search. We'll find out. It appears the new way to search is going to be AI. Some device, one of the systems. And the way I know it is, it's almost what Warren did when he started his businesses. He said, invest in things that you use. I think I simplified it. Because humans, we think we're so unique, but just word to everybody, we all have these patterns that are, well, I tell you what, there's not too many different silos of patterns that I've seen, and a lot of us fit into one of them. And so I'm using AI on a daily basis to engage with my device.
Yeah. You got it.
So it's coming. It seems now like carrying a big load to stop and type. Even though we could voice into that bar in Google, it seems like an extra step. Whether it is not, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's always fun to see how this sorts out,
isn't it? Yeah. What you've developed some really good high-level operational efficiencies, a couple of them throughout your books and scaling up in the businesses and all the consulting work you do. A 1-page strategic plan and the Rockefeller habits checklist. See, I like when I see one or two things that I believe, I'm like, boy, they have these practical applications that if you use them, you could really improve your business. Are those substantial in what you do, those two pieces, or am I just pulling two out of many?
Well, there's 3. We have 12 1-page tools, but you're right. I first became well known for the 1-page strategic plan. Second, like a pilot who's making sure the plane is safe and flying, they've got a checklist. This was a checklist for us who pilot our companies, and it's proved to, stand the test of time. And then I think we're super well known for the daily huddle. And the fact that if you want to move faster, you need to pulse faster. And I reached out to Nate, one of the co-founders of Airbnb, when they lost $1 billion worth of bookings that Friday the 13th of the pandemic. And so I invited him on to we spun up a virtual event to kind of help all of us save our businesses. And unprompted, I asked Nate in front of everyone, hey, what's the first thing you guys did? And he said, we went into a daily meeting 7 days a week, not just 5 days a week. The first thing Steve Jobs did when he needed to turn Apple around is got those 5 and put them in and met with them daily. He had lunch every day with Johnny Ive. And so this power of seeing the pattern in 6 days instead of 6 weeks or 6 months is really underpins our work. And that's your biggest leverage you've got. That 8 minutes saves everybody an hour and a half.
I heard Jamie Dimon speak to this during the financial crisis in 2008. He said him and his team, he said they were staying for 24 hours.
Yeah.
Right. And so he said, not that we stayed 24 hours a day in the office, but he said it was a year that we all worked different than we ever have, and we were already hard workers.
Yeah. You
Right.
got it.
Yeah.
So those
so
are
is
the
that-
three.
Yeah.
Those are
Is
the
that-
one-page strategic plan, Rockefeller habits, and the daily huddle.
You think it's important to always operate that way, just not in times of extreme concern and vulnerability?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, because if 8 minutes a day saves you an hour and a half, all we have is that time. Why not that trade-off? And it's one of the reasons, side note, where I really encourage entrepreneurs. I don't know where this happened, Mark, but somewhere along the way, somebody convinced entrepreneurs they're supposed to do one-on-ones with their direct reports. And that is insanity. And I am so glad that Jensen at NVIDIA has got a 9-minute video of why. Brian Chesky's now spoken about it. Mark Zuckerberg in an interview a few weeks ago chimed in. None of these most successful entrepreneurs, let alone the rest of us mere mortals, should be wasting this kind of valuable time. And instead, let's get on it every day instead of meet formally once every 2 weeks individually with the person. But I could go on and on about that.
Yeah. Do you think, from what you've seen, because we're always invoking these big names, and I'm wondering, are there hundreds of thousands of other people that have similar skills? It's just their business is different, their timing's different. But is there something these folks, because there's some nameless people too that are highly successful that we never hear about, that we never talk about, that are on social media, some elite folks.
Yeah.
But do all these people that get invoked and they're on stages and have built crazy businesses, these uncommon people, do they have things in common, or are they all anarchists and one man and woman shows? Or do they have things in common that we can really clarify?
They do. And Mark, you are right. And that's why in my books, I talk mainly about mere mortal companies. I give example after example after example of entrepreneurs like us doing exactly these things and getting the results. And you probably saw that Mark Andreessen did a video about Elon. How does he really run 6 companies? And what he said is those practices harken back to the industrialists, the Charles Schwabs, the Henry Fords, and all of that. And that's why I called my first book, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. There are a common set of practices that haven't changed for 100 years, let alone in the last 10 years, that these guys that are achieving massive things are just doing what the industrialists did back when they were scaling up that part of the business. So yes, that's why I wrote the book. And these checklist of habits have been common for decades and need to be in place. And the good news is our books we talk about, and in our talks, mere moral, like co-distributing, COE distributing. He's one of us. Nobody knows J.D. Ewing, but this guy, he's ahead of most of us in AI, for instance.
Does the hustle and the grind and the lack of balance, does it ever ease?
Well, there's a joke, an entrepreneur would rather work 16 hours a day for themselves than 8 hours for someone else. And we like to say at some point that quits being a joke. And yes, first of all, we don't think there's a balance. It's always a blend between work, family, and self. And it's a constant move. And yes, I think at some level, when you start, if you're not putting in 120 hours a week, you're not going to get escape velocity. But at some point, and Jamie Dimon and others have talked to it, if you're working more than 50 or 60 hours, you actually get ineffective. Your productivity actually begins to drop. And we know at the end of the day, with AI taking over all the administrivia, what we're going to bring is that last piece of creativity. And the creatives, the Picassos, the Edisons, all of those historical figures.
Teslas, don't leave Tesla out.
Right. But you can't do creative work more than about 2 or 3 hours a day. And then you got to go like Elon, go play video games. Right?
Yeah, it's wild.
Because by the way, and this is why I think it's a good model. He's running 6 companies, essentially running each one a day a week as Mark Andreessen. And that's what we found. You could really run your venture a day a week. That gives you the rest of the week to do the market-facing activities that allow you to continue to propel it forward. So that's at the heart of our work.
Ask the right questions, have elite leaders around you leading those companies, and meet with them.
And an advisory board. Mark,
There you go.
if I am on my high horse about something, even with our coaching partners, not enough of us mere mortals have an advisory board, which is an elite group above our senior team that we can afford. These are people we could never afford. We're lucky to get 15 minutes, but we only need 15 minutes of their insight to save us 15 months of headache. So getting an advisory board is critical.
What are the steps someone needs to build if that's important? What do they need to do proactively so the right people on the advisory board say yes?
Well, the first thing is they need to identify what are their 3 to 5 strategic pillars. Do we have time for a little side story?
I'm here. I will let you go anytime you need to, but I will spend all the time. This conversation is awesome.
Well, you know the company that Warren Buffett went all in last year, and that was Domino's. I don't think people realize Domino's Pizza stock in the last 15 years outperformed the 3 A's, Alphabet, Amazon, and Apple. And part of it is their CEOs, and Hubert Joly said, you do not have a strategy if you haven't named it. I want to say that again. Entrepreneurs, your job is to set strategy, but you don't have a strategy if you haven't given it a name. And so theirs is a hungry for more. And more, M-O-R-E, stands for the 4 strategic pillars of what Domino's is focused on moving forward. So first thing you have to do is know your 3, 4, or 5 pillars. Then the question is, who's this? And you can literally chat GPT this. Who is the smartest person in the world on this topic? So I knew I needed to go global, Mark, that I didn't want all my eggs in the US basket. So I'm like, who's the smartest guy? It's Hermann Simon out of Germany. He wrote the book Hidden Champions of the 21st Century. And I got Herman to come on as an informal advisor. We knew we had to move our stuff online. I'm at a conference and I hear this guy speak, John Kone, who ran Dell Learning for Michael Dell. And he said, all you adult learners don't know how to do it right. Here's how you do it right. I'm like, you're right. So I went up to John and I got John on my advisory board. But I only needed to call him for like 15 minutes. But what are your strategic pillars? Who's the smartest person you can find? One last story. I've got a client, John Mooney, out of St. Louis. They're commercial landscaping and maintenance. He's the best in St. Louis. He wants to take his net worth from 10 million to $250 million. We're like, all right, game on. We already got him halfway there in 28 months. But the key is we put a board together. He knew he's going to have to do it through acquisition. So we got the smartest PE guy in St. Louis, Tim, on the board. We got Bruce, who put the 2 biggest roll-ups in the industry on the board, $1 billion in. We got Jeff, who is the king of brokering these deals. Then we brought in a banker because we needed to raise the debt, get the debt in order to do it. And then I'm there to help him do the integration. So John could not have done this, nor his team by himself. But we've been there to educate and help him and guide. And that's why it's happened. So get an advisory board together.
I sat down for breakfast about 6 years ago. I bought an office building from one of our local billionaires here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Yeah. And we sat down. When you do something like that, then you show up on someone's radar and they say, let's go to breakfast. And you say yes to all those. And he said, the best advice I can give you is, he said, you need your personal board of directors. It's your advisory board you're talking about. And so he said that if he would have done that sooner, he might have taken his billion to 5 or 10 billion.
My first student, 1982, Ron Houston, out of Denver, built a company that did custom printed circuit boards. When it was time for him to exit, the smartest thing he did is he found this retired investment banker because he didn't want the guy pitching him. He found this well-known retired investment banker, and he said, would you go to breakfast with me once a month? And I want you to beat me up. I want you to look at my company through your lens. Tell me the things I need to tweak. And so when he exited a year later, I think it's why he got an outsized amount, because he got some brains bigger than his and his team on the team.
We could talk forever. This time today is just fantastic and awesome. What's the advice you invoked it? It aligns with your business. A guy's doing 10 million and he wants to go to $250 million. What's the right advice for someone that has a 2 million or a 5 million or a $10 million business that thinks they have the right idea to go to 50 or 100 or 150 million? It's what you guys specialize in, right? Without totally breaking down the business, is doing a whole marketing commercial, which we all love doing those. When someone has the thought, that's what they want. What's the next step? Because that's what it is. The entrepreneur had to have the thought, I'm doing 10 million. I want to go to $250 million. He thought that himself, I believe.
Yeah. Net worth, not revenue.
Yep.
Net worth.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. By the way, net, valuation, we just
5x, 7x, 4x.
Well,
on the business.
we sold a company with 3 million of EBITDA for 90 million, 30x EBITDA. So first of all, one of the things we teach is, man, if you sold for some industry multiple, you already screwed up.
Right? And I want you to continue here. Why I would never, and I would say never sell. That's part of the positioning when somebody offers me $1 billion down the road. The reason why I would never sell is I'm always valuing my company based on what it's going to be.
Yeah.
I'm so unreasonable. I tell people that all the time. I'm like, go and talk to someone else because I'm so unreasonable. But you have to prove it, right? You have to show that it truly is going to be that.
Yeah. Well,
there you go.
I know we want to go down this rabbit hole, but I do, in my 42 years of hanging with entrepreneurs, is the biggest mistake I see is they don't sell soon enough.
Yeah.
Wealth, and it was Ted Leonsis who taught me this, wealth is created through transactions. Mm-hmm. And so Ted Leonsis in his 20s had Redgate Communications. He sold it to Harris for $5 million. They predictably blew it up. So he was able to buy it back for $1 million. But he got the money. Then he sold that to AOL and he became Steve Case's partner. And that monetized his asset again.
AOL, what did they do? And all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he took that wealth and bought the sports teams that he has today. And look, Michael Dell, the deal of the century. By taking his company public, back private, back public. It's only through transactions. So you should sell the company when you are most excited about it. Because the valuation,
that's what's be worth the most. Is that what you think? There's something about the DNA that's when it's worth the most?
It is, because look, the people are going to buy it. They can smell it on your breath. Wait, here's what happens. Entrepreneurs finally hit the curve. And they're like, why would I sell it now? I'm making so much money. But they hold on until the curve dips. And now you don't have a story. Remember, the valuation is just the sum total of the area under the S curve. I could be mathematical here. And then you just present value that big chunk. And all you do is convince the person who's buying you that you can take this even higher and further than we could. But it's all about that trajectory. And when you've got it at max trajectory, that's when your story is the best.
You've been hanging out at MIT too long. He's bringing the math to us, you all.
I'm telling you, the biggest issue is the guys that came to my MIT program, $1 million, $5 million, they had no clue what an income statement, they couldn't read an income statement, balance sheet, or cash flow statement to save their soul. And this is where they get their heads handed to them.
Yeah.
So our cash flow story tool makes that extremely easy for guys to finally understand the fourth decision: cash, capital allocation. And that's what we had to teach John Mooney. Let me just take it just for a moment.
Yeah.
John's got a $25 million company with 9% EBITDA, and we convince him to take on $10 million in debt, signed personally, he and his wife. But he had the advisors at the table that said, And our message has been pee yourself, do to yourself. By the way, he almost peed himself, but you got to pee yourself, do to yourself what a private equity firm would do to you. So you reap the benefits and not them.
Yep.
But
Leverage it up. Let's leverage it up with a great plan, right?
But you can easily say that, but you got to put it all together and have the folks who understand, so that we knew he had the coverage, that the banks were convinced that, yes, now they're ready to go to 40 million instead of just the 10 million. But we had to up his game and the sophistication on the capital allocation side. Let me just recommend one book. Please, everyone.
Hey, Verne, to wrap this up, can you recommend one book for us?
Read the book Outsiders by William Thorndike. 8 mere mortals like us using capital the right way in order to scale. It is the weakest leg in most of our entrepreneurs' companies.
Okay, he's given us the advice. One thing to do: go read or listen to Outsiders. Thank you for the time today. This was awesome.
Mark,
love the conversation.
So much fun. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for letting me ramble on.
Well, hey, we were happy to have the rambles.
All right.
Just give us one place to interact with you. Where's the place? Make it simple where we can come find you and everything you're doing.
Scalingup.com. And you'll see a whole bunch of free videos, chapters, tools. It's all there.
And then if somebody wants to jump online and get some of you all live a little bit and see what it's about, you have something coming up the next couple weeks, or is it consistent? What is that?
Twice a year, I do my virtual masterclass. It's 3 hours a day, people, strategy, execution, cash, 90 minutes each. It's next week, so this may not even broadcast in time for that, but we do it every year, twice a year.
We'll find a way to ramble and give you some love. Hey, enjoy everything Barcelona is going to give you here for June.
All right.